A quiet afternoon turns into a nightmare when Officer Miller, a white cop, falsely accuses young Jamal of stealing. Jamal, a black teenager, stands frozen, confused, powerless, and already treated as guilty before anyone hears his voice. But the boy carries a truth the officer never imagined: his mother, Valerie, is a top CIA operative. How far will Miller go to frame him? And how far will Valerie go to protect her son and expose the truth? Would you stand silent or fight back? If this story grips you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's dive into the story. It was just another afternoon in Maplewood, a quiet white neighborhood where everything seemed still and predictable. But for Malik Johnson, a 15-year-old black boy with calm eyes and a gentle demeanor, the moment he pushed open the door of Turner's Grocery, the air shifted. The bell above the door chimed light and ordinary, yet the sound seemed to echo too loudly in the silence that followed. Every head in the small store turned, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Malik had been here before. He knew this look, and he hated it. Mrs. Turner, the elderly white woman behind the counter, didn't even try to hide her reaction. She stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she watched him and his best friend Marcus step inside. Her wrinkled hands paused in the middle of counting coins, her gaze cutting through the air like a blade. Malik lowered his head, shoulders tense, careful not to brush against the rack of potato chips by the entrance. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, as though every step needed to prove something: that he wasn't a threat, that he didn't belong to the picture people in this neighborhood carried in their minds. Marcus, a year older, was the opposite. Tall, broad-shouldered for his age, he laughed lightly as he walked in his sneakers, squeaking against the floor tiles. He whispered to Malik, "Relax, man. We're just buying snacks." But Malik's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. They both knew. This wasn't just a store. It was a test. From the far corner, two women whispered loud enough to be heard, "Kids like them always cause trouble." The words floated through the stale air like poison. Malik caught it, so did Marcus. Marcus muttered under his breath, "Here we go again." Malik's hands curled into fists in his pockets, though his face stayed composed. He glanced at the rows of candy bars, forcing himself to focus. He didn't want to give anyone a reason. Not one. Still, Mrs. Turner's eyes followed him like a shadow. She adjusted her glasses, leaned forward on the counter, and called out sharply, "Don't touch unless you're buying." The store fell into silence again. Marcus turned his head, his voice half mocking but laced with anger. "We just walked in, lady. Chill." Mrs. Turner pursed her lips, unmoved. Her tone dripped with that familiar, sharp prejudice. "I know your type. Always hanging around pretending to look. Nothing good comes from it." Malik felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but he remembered his mother's words, "Pick your battles, Malik." Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. So he kept his voice steady, calm. "We're just here for some chips and a soda." But Mrs. Turner didn't let up. She crossed her arms, glaring as if every word he spoke was a lie waiting to happen. In the back, a man coughed, shaking his head. Another muttered, "Can't believe she lets them in at all." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his carefree smile fading. He leaned toward Malik, whispering, "Man, let's just go somewhere else. This ain't worth it." But Malik didn't move. There was a part of him deep down that refused to run every time he felt cornered. He straightened his back slightly, lifting his chin, not defiant, not aggressive, just quietly firm. He picked a bag of chips from the shelf, holding it up. His fingers trembled ever so slightly. "See, buying?" The old woman's eyes didn't soften. If anything, they hardened. She stepped from behind the counter, her shoes clicking against the tile floor as she approached. The room grew smaller, the stairs heavier. "Don't think I won't call the police," she snapped, standing close enough that Malik could smell the perfume clinging to her sweater. "I've been running this place for 30 years. I know trouble when it walks through that door." Marcus laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Lady, the only trouble here is the way you're looking at us." For a moment, Malik thought Mrs. Turner might actually strike Marcus. The tension was that sharp, that dangerous. Malik's voice came out quieter, almost trembling, but steady enough to cut the silence. "We haven't done anything wrong." The words hung there. Fragile, true, but they didn't matter. Not here, not yet. Because in this store, under those glares, truth was never enough. And that was the moment everyone felt it, the injustice thickening in the air. like a storm cloud forming waiting for the first strike of lightning. The bell above the grocery door rang again, but this time the sound carried weight. Officer Bradley Cole walked in, a white cop with square shoulders, a heavy helm, and that air of someone who already decided he owned the room. His boots struck the tile slow and deliberate, echoing with authority. His eyes didn't wander like a man's shopping. No, he locked them on Malik the moment he stepped inside, like a predator spotting its prey. Mrs. Turner stiffened behind the counter. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers worrying the hem of her apron. Bradley's voice cut across the store. "Everything fine here, ma'am?" The question was simple, but it landed like a warning. Mrs. Turner's eyes darted to Malik, then back at the officer. "Yes, everything is fine, officer," she said quickly, voice thin as glass. Then she stopped herself, the rest of her words swallowed by the icy glare Bradley shot her way. She looked down at her hands trembling. Malik felt that glare too, even though it wasn't aimed directly at him yet. His chest tightened. He turned his eyes back to the shelf, trying to pretend none of this was happening. He picked up a box of pens, rolling it in his hand, just something to ground himself. And then the shout came. "Put that back!" Bradley's voice roared, sharp and sudden. The sound cracked through the store like a whip. A woman near the counter gasped. A man froze mid-step. All eyes turned toward Malik. Malik's heart jumped into his throat. He turned wide-eyed, stammering, "No, sir. I was just looking." But Bradley was already storming over, his boots striking fast now. He loomed over the boy, close enough Malik could smell the sharp sting of his cologne. Without hesitation, Bradley shoved a hand into Malik's jacket pocket. He pulled out a pack of candy. He held it high. "Right here, already hiding something." The crowd erupted in murmurs. "Knew it," someone muttered. A woman whispered to her friend, "They start young, don't they?" Heads shook, lips curled in disgust. Malik's voice cracked. "No, that's not. I didn't steal that. My friend gave it to me. Marcus." He pointed desperately, his hand trembling toward Marcus. Marcus stumbled forward. "It's true, I gave him that eye." But Bradley snapped his head toward Marcus, his glare burning like a threat. "Quiet, kid. You want to join him? Keep talking." Marcus froze his throat, working, but no sound coming. Out. And then came the move nobody caught, nobody except Mrs. Turner, who saw too much but said nothing. Bradley's other hand slipped smoothly into Malik's pocket. In a blink, he withdrew a small flashlight, one that hadn't been there before. With theatrical force, he raised it over his head. Caught red-handed, he bellowed, voice swelling with false triumph. The crowd gasped, louder this time. To them, it was proof. A cop said it, and that was enough. Malik's knees weakened. His hands shook as he tried to explain, his voice breaking. "Please, you don't understand. I didn't put that there." But every word was drowned out by the whispers, the sneers, the clucking tongues. A man muttered, "Thieves like him always play innocent." Another spat under his breath. Just another one of them. Bradley's grip clamped down on Malik's arm, rough and merciless. "Save it. You're done." Malik twisted, panic surging. "No, I swear I didn't steal anything." His voice cracked so loud it almost echoed, but no one moved to help. Mrs. Turner's lips parted, a faint "wait" escaping, but she quickly swallowed it when Bradley's eyes cut back to her. Fear sealed her silence, and so Malik stood there, surrounded by strangers who looked at him not with sympathy, but with judgment already carved into their faces. No trial, no chance. Just the crushing weight of a pointer wrapped in the authority of a uniform. And in that moment, the trap was complete. The sound of metal clicking shut echoed louder than any voice on that street. Officer Bradley yanked Malik out of the store by the arm, his hand rough and unrelenting. Then, without hesitation, he twisted Malik's wrist behind his back and snapped cold steel cuffs onto them. Right there, in broad daylight, in the middle of Main Street. Malik was only 15, but in that moment he looked even younger. His shoulders trembling, his knees threatening to buckle beneath him. He gasped out, his voice cracking. "I didn't do it. Please, sir, I didn't do it." But his cries were swallowed whole by the crowd gathering around. People slowed their steps, circling like vultures smelling blood. Some sneered, some whispered, others pulled out their phones. One man laughed under his breath and muttered, "Another thief! What else is new?" A woman holding her toddler's hand shook her head with disdain. "Parents these days, They let their kids run wild. The sting of judgment pierced sharper than the cuffs cutting into Malik's skin. He turned his face toward the crowd, desperate for just one person, just one to believe him. His eyes darted wildly pleading, but all he found were eyes that condemned him before they ever heard his voice. And then Malik broke. Tears streamed down his cheeks, not soft tears, but the kind that came with sobs that stole your breath away. His chest heaved as he cried out again, louder this time, almost choking on the words. "I didn't steal anything, I swear, please." I didn't do it, but no one stepped forward. Through the glass door of the shop, Marcus stood frozen. His best friend, the boy he'd known since kindergarten, was being dragged into the gutter of public shame, and Marcus couldn't move. His hands pressed against the glass, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. Inside, his heart screamed, "Do something, say something." But his body betrayed him. Fear locked his legs in place, fear of the same cuffs, the same humiliation. His chest rose and fell quickly, his breath shallow. He wanted to shout that the candy had been his, that Bradley planted the toy, but his voice never made it past his lips. From the crowd, someone scoffed, "Well, that's what happens. Kids like him never learn." That sentence hung heavy in the air, poisoning everything. Malik's cries, Marcus's silence, even the faint sound of traffic seemed to bend around it. And yet not everyone's eyes were hard. From the store's doorway, Mrs. Turner lingered. Her hands shook against the wooden frame, her lips pressed tight. Her face told a story, her mouth refused to share a flicker of regret of conflict. She had seen what Bradley did. She knew what her silence meant. For a brief moment, her eyes met Malik's. His tear-streaked face, his trembling body, his desperate innocence. It cut through her like a knife. She almost spoke. Her lips parted, but then she stopped. She looked away. She lowered her head as though the weight of complicity was easier to bear than the risk of defiance. Malik, his voice ragged, now twisted to look at her. "Ma'am, please tell them you saw—" "You know I didn't," but Mrs. Turner's gaze fell to the floor. Her silence was deafening. Officer Bradley tugged the boy forward with a satisfied smirk, parading him like a trophy. Malik stumbled, barely able to keep pace, his sneakers scraping against the pavement. Bradley raised his voice so the crowd could hear, so that his version of the story would drown out Malik's truth. "Caught red-handed, folks, another little thug trying to take what's not his. This is what happens when you think you can beat the system." The crowd responded with murmurs, some in agreement, some recording, others simply entertained by the spectacle. And Malik, in the middle of it all, looked like a boy swallowed whole by a storm he never caused. His sobs grew quieter, not because he stopped hurting, but because the humiliation pressed so hard against his chest it stole the sound from him. The more he cried, the more they laughed. The more he pleaded, the less they listened. And behind the glass, Marcus pressed his forehead against the door. His voice finally escaped, though, only in a whisper no one else could hear. "I'm sorry, Malik. I'm so sorry." But sorry didn't stop the handcuffs from tightening. Sorry didn't erase the jeers of strangers. Sorry didn't stop a boy from being marched down a street not as a child, but as a criminal in their eyes. The air itself seemed heavier, thick, with an injustice so sharp you could taste it. It was the kind of moment that etches itself into memory, the kind you replay in your mind years later wishing you had done something different. And yet at that time no one did. The humiliation was complete, public, cruel, and deliberate. Malik Johnson, a 15-year-old boy, was not only arrested, he was broken in front of everyone who could have stood up for him, but didn't. And that was the first time, but not the last, that silence would hurt just as much as the lie. The crowd's chatter was still buzzing when the screech of tires cut through the noise. A modest sedan jerked to a stop just feet from the scene. The driver's door flew open, and a woman hurried out, her face pale with terror. It was Elena Johnson, Malik's mother. She wasn't dressed in power or authority. She wore a simple blouse jeans that had seen too many wash cycles and her hair tied back neatly. To the crowd, she looked like any other working mother or woman who had rushed from errands or a shift at work, not someone meant to face down the law. But her eyes, those eyes were frantic, searching for her child. And when they found Malik shackled in steel, under the grip of Officer Bradley Cole, her voice cracked the air. "That's my son. What are you doing to him?" The crowd shifted. Some looked away. Others leaned in closer, hungry for the spectacle. Malik, his small body trembling, lifted his tear-stained face. "Mom." His voice broke as it carried over the noise, cutting through the jeers and the whispers. Mom, I didn't do anything. Lena's chest rose and fell, her hands trembling as if the world was tilting under her. She rushed toward him, but Bradley shoved his arm out like a gate, his stance wide, his jaw clenched. Step back, lady, he sneered, teaching a thief a lesson. You should thank me for stopping him before he got worse. The words stung like venom. The people around muttered. Some nodded as if it were truth, others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty in his tone. Elena's hands reached out, though she dared not touch him with Bradley standing there like a wall. He's just a child, she pleaded, her voice breaking, trembling with fear and a mother's desperation. If you think he took something, I'll pay for it. Whatever it is, just let him go. Please. Her tone was raw, stripped of pride. She wasn't bargaining for fairness anymore, just mercy. Bradley's lips twisted into a smirk. He chuckled a low sound that made Malik shrink even smaller. You can't buy your way out of this, he said coldly. Not today, not here. Thieves don't walk away just because mommy waves a wallet. Laughter rippled through part of the crowd, cruel and shallow. Someone whispered, serves him right. Another held up a phone higher, recording every second. Malik's cry cut through them all. I didn't do it, Mom. Please believe me. His voice cracked, echoing across the street, and the boy's raw panic made a few onlookers shift uneasily. Elena bent down slightly as though trying to make her voice reach him across the invisible walls closing in. I believe you, baby. I believe you. Her words trembled, but she held his gaze. She had to be his anchor, even as her knees threatened to give way. Bradley yanked on the cuffs, forcing Malik forward. Save the tears, he muttered. You'll have plenty of time to cry where you're going. The cruelty of it struck like a whip. Elena gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could steady her racing heart. She wanted to scream, to claw at the injustice before her, but the weight of the moment pressed down hard. She was one woman against the uniform, against the whispers, against the eyes of a public ready to condemn her child. Behind the store window, Mrs. Turner stood frozen, her lips trembling. She saw everything, the trick, the planted candy, the deliberate lie, but her head lowered her silence, sealing the boy's fate. And in the corner, Marcus pressed himself against the glass, fists balled tight, his young face contorted in silent agony. He wanted to shout the truth, to run out and defend his friend, but fear welded his feet to the floor, and shame kept his voice trapped inside his chest. Elena took another step forward, though her body quivered. Officer, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. He's my son. He's all I have. Don't do this to him. But Bradley didn't see a mother. He saw prey-cornered weakness he could flex against. He shook his head, mocking her. Maybe you should have taught him better, lady, her lips parted, words failing her. The humiliation, the helplessness, it was a knife to her soul. But in her eyes, something flickered just for a second, a spark buried deep, hidden beneath the trembling. The crowd saw a desperate mother on the verge of breaking. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that beneath that fear lived a fire that soon enough would burn through every lie on that street. Bradley's smirk deepened, as if the cruelty itself gave him energy. He leaned close enough for Elena to hear and spat out, "No wonder the boy's a thief. Look at his mother." For a split second, silence clung to the street. Then the crowd erupted laughter, rippling like a wave through strangers who had no stake in the boy's life, but felt entitled to judge it. Someone jeered from the back. "Lock him up," another voice chimed in. "That's what happens when you let them roam free." Elena's face stiffened, her hands curled into fists at her sides, trembling, not from weakness, but from the sheer effort it took to hold herself together. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking, but steady enough to carry. He's innocent. Let him go. But Bradley only tightened his grip on Malik's arm, dragging the boy toward the police cruiser, as if Elena's words were nothing but background noise. Malik stumbled, his small frame no match for the officer's force. The boy didn't scream this time. He didn't plead. He only let the tears stream down his cheeks in silence, his wide eyes fixed on his mother, as though searching for a miracle that refused to come. That silence cut sharper than any cry could. It was the silence of a child learning too early that the world could be merciless. Elena took a step forward, her heart racing, but the officer shoved Malik against the side of the squad car, metal cuffs rattling against the steel. The sharp sound echoed through the air like a hammer striking an anvil. The crowd pressed closer, phones lifted higher. Some chuckled, eager to capture justice being served. Others whispered, not daring to meet Elena's eyes, but quick to nod along with Bradley's authority. Across the street, Marcus, still standing half-hidden behind the glass, couldn't hold back anymore. His small body shook as sobs tore through him. He pressed his fists against his eyes, but it was no use. Tears spilled freely, blurring the scene before him. His lips moved, but no sound came. He wanted to shout, to run, to tear those cuffs from Malik's wrists. Yet his feet betrayed him, heavy as stone, glued to the floor in paralyzing fear. That was the cruelest part. Fear didn't just silence children, it shackled them. And so in that awful moment, two boys stood worlds apart, one shoved into a squad car like a criminal, the other frozen in place, both bound by forces bigger than themselves. Elena's chest rose and fell in quick bursts. She could feel the stares stabbing at her back, the mockery tightening around her like a noose. But what seared her most was Malik's gaze, the way his eyes begged her, without words, asking if she could still protect him, asking if the bond between mother and son was strong enough to withstand the humiliation. The sight nearly broke her. She forced her voice out louder now, even as it cracked with desperation. "You can't do this. He hasn't done anything wrong." Bradley didn't even glance at her. He shoved Malik into the back seat, his laughter sharp and cutting. "Innocent." He slammed the door shut with a thud that made several onlookers flinch. "They're all innocent until proven guilty, right? Isn't that the line?" The crowd roared again, some clapping, some laughing, their voices drowning out Elena's protest. To them, it was theater, a show of power, another story to pass around later as entertainment. But to Elena, it was her son's soul being dragged through the mud. Her knees wavered. She steadied herself against the cold hood of a nearby car. She wanted to scream, to tear the laughter from the throats of those who mocked. Instead, she whispered under her breath a plea that sounded more like a prayer. "Please, God, don't let them break him." Inside the squad car, Malik leaned his head against the window. He didn't sob anymore. His lips pressed into a thin line, his small shoulders trembling, his eyes glassy but defiant. And in that fragile stillness, you could almost hear the unspoken message. The wound had already been carved deep. And Marcus, watching through the glass, understood it too. He pressed his forehead to the window, his breath fogging the pain, and whispered through his tears, as if Malik could somehow hear him. "Hold on. Please hold on." That was the moment the humiliation reached its peak. A mother stripped of her dignity, a child robbed of his innocence, and a crowd complicit in their silence, all wrapped in the sound of laughter that didn't belong. The scene left no one untouched. For those who watched, it was impossible not to feel the sting. To see a boy's tears fall against a backdrop of jeers was to glimpse the ugliest corner of the human heart. And though Elena stood powerless in that instant, the weight of it all was already carving something deeper inside her, something that wouldn't remain quiet forever. The air shifted. You could feel it. Elena, who moments ago seemed like nothing more than a desperate mother, suddenly straightened her back. Her eyes no longer looked pleading. They burned with something sharper, something unyielding. She took a deep breath, then walked forward with a steadiness that silenced even the mocking crowd. Her hand slipped into her bag, and for a heartbeat, no one dared move. The only sound was Malik's shaky sobs and Marcus's quiet sniffles. Then with a single motion, Elena pulled out her wallet. She raised her arm high, her voice cutting through the street like a blade. "You're making a serious mistake." The sunlight caught at the edge of the card she held aloft. And suddenly, everything stopped. The seal of the Central Intelligence Agency gleamed under the afternoon sun. A hush fell over the crowd. The same people who had laughed a second ago froze with their mouths half open. A woman gasped, dropping the shopping bag she was clutching. A man muttered under his breath, "No way." Malik's tears clung to his lashes, but for the first time, hope flickered in his eyes. He looked at his mother as if seeing her for the very first time. Marcus gripped the straps of his backpack so tightly his knuckles turned white. His jaw fell open. "Mom," he whispered, his voice trembling. Officer Bradley blinked, his smirk vanishing. He took a step back, his hand still gripping Malik's arm. His jaw worked as if trying to form words, but all that came out was a stammer. That could be fake. Anyone can order a badge online. But his voice cracked. The confidence was gone. Elena didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice dropped low, each word measured, vibrating with quiet fury. I never wanted to show this. Never. But I will not stand by while you destroy my son. The tension in the air was unbearable. You could almost hear the crowd's heartbeat sink in disbelief. Bradley's partner, a younger officer who had been silent until now, leaned forward, squinting at the card. His face went pale. Bradley, that's real. Bradley snapped his head at him, his voice rising, desperate now. Shut up. You don't know that. She's bluffing. She has to be bluffing. But even as he said it, sweat trickled down his temple. His grip on Malik loosened. Elena stepped closer, her heels striking the pavement with deliberate weight. She was trembling not from fear, but from the fury of a mother pushed past her breaking point. Her eyes never left Bradley's. You think this is a game? You think humiliating a child proves you're a man? Look around you, officer. Every witness here just saw who you really are. The crowd murmured, their earlier laughter twisting into shame. A man whispered to his wife, "She's CIA. Dear God, she's CIA." Malik, still bound in handcuffs, lifted his chin. His voice cracked, but he found the courage to speak. Mom, does this mean they have to let me go? Elena's lips pressed tight. For a moment, you could see the war inside her, the woman who wanted to shield her children, and the agent who had sworn to protect her country. Finally, she nodded, her eyes softening just for him. Yes, baby, they don't get to hurt you anymore. Her words seemed to echo off the brick walls, bouncing back with a force that left Bradley visibly shaken. He tried one last time, his voice high-pitched, defensive. She's lying. This is some trick. I'm not falling for this. But no one was listening anymore. The badge had spoken louder than anything. The authority, the truth, the sheer weight of it. It crushed every ounce of bravado he had left. Elena lowered the card slowly, her hand trembling as if the very act of revealing it had cost her something deep. Her voice broke soft but cutting. I never wanted my children to know. I never wanted them to see me this way. But you left me no choice. Malik's chest heaved as tears rolled silently down his cheeks. Not of fear this time, but of relief. He looked at his mother, not as the fragile woman he thought he knew, but as something far greater, someone who had just shifted the entire world around them. And Bradley, he stood there, cornered, exposed, stripped of every ounce of power. The twist had landed, and the street knew nothing would be the same after this. For a moment, the street froze. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The summer air itself seemed to hold still, heavy with tension. The badge in Elena's hand glinted, a single beam of sunlight bouncing off it like a warning flare. Bradley tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin, brittle. His smirk trembled at the edges. She's bluffing, he said, shaking at his head, forcing a chuckle. His eyes darted nervously to the crowd as if begging for their agreement. But Elena didn't flinch. She stood firm, her voice low yet sharp as steel. I know who you are, Officer Cole, she said, each word deliberate, slicing through the murmurs around them. And I know what you've done. Bradley stiffened, the blood drained from his face. He barked out, she's lying. Don't listen to her. But the crack in his tone betrayed him, and the crowd caught it. A ripple of doubt spread through the people gathered. Elena's gaze never left him. You planted evidence on Jamal Harris, didn't you? A 15-year-old boy you dragged into the system for something he never stole? Her words cut like a blade. And then there was Carla Jenkins, 16 years old, accused of carrying drugs you slipped into her backpack. Gasps echoed through the street. A woman in the crowd whispered, I remember Jamal. That ruined his life. Another voice added, Carla. My cousin knew her. That case was dirty. The murmurs grew louder. Recognition spread like wildfire. Names Elena spoke weren't strangers. They were kids from their own community, their own families. Bradley's jaw tightened. His hand twitched near his belt, but he didn't dare draw attention to it. You have no proof, he snapped, but his words landed flat, hollow. Elena stepped closer, her presence commanding, her tone unwavering. Proof. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with restrained fury. I am the proof. I've been watching you, Officer Cole. The agency has been watching you. You thought no one saw what you did to those kids because they were poor, because they were black, because nobody would listen to their cries. But I listened, and I remember every single name. Her words fell heavy, undeniable. The crowd erupted in whispers, voices, climbing higher, outrage, mixing with disbelief. And then Malik. He had been silent, tears streaking his cheeks, but now he lifted his head. Slowly, deliberately, he stood straighter, his small shoulders squared behind his mother, his eyes fixed on her with a light that hadn't been there before. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't just a boy being dragged away. He was the son of a woman who refused to break. Beside him, Marcus trembled. The boy's hands shook, but not from fear anymore. Something else had taken root. Guilt. His wide eyes darted between Bradley and Elena. He whispered so softly only those near him could hear. He told me to point at Malik. He made me. The word sent a shockwave through the group of onlookers. Heads turned sharply toward Marcus. Whispers swelled into an audible gasp. Elena caught the shift instantly. She turned her head slightly, her eyes locking with the boys. Marcus, she said gently, her tone soft but steady. You don't have to be afraid anymore. You've been used just like the others. Bradley lunged forward, snarling. Don't you say a word, boy. His voice cracked under the strain, no longer the bark of authority, but the panic of a man exposed. The crowd reacted, voices rising in protest. Let the boy speak, one man shouted. We're done with your lies, another cried out. The air had shifted entirely. The balance of power was no longer his. Bradley wasn't in control. Elena was. She stood taller, her badge still in her hand, but it wasn't the metal that gave her strength. It was the truth pouring from her lips, the unshakable resolve in her eyes. This street is no courtroom, she declared, her voice carrying over the growing unrest. But justice doesn't wait for walls and robes. It lives right here in our voices, in our courage to call out what's wrong. Her words ignited this crowd. No longer passive observers, they leaned in, emboldened embers of anger, turning into flames of defiance. Bradley's mask was crumbling, his authority bleeding away with every second. And through it all, Malik's eyes never left his mother. He no longer wept. He watched wide-eyed as she became the shield he had prayed for, the wall no one could push down. In that moment, he saw her not just as his mother, but as a force larger than fear itself. The standoff had become more than a confrontation between one officer and one woman. It was a trial in the open air, a reckoning on the streets where truth was the only weapon and courage the only shield. And Elena was winning. For a split second, you could hear nothing but breathing, the heavy kind that comes when an entire crowd is waiting for someone to fall. Elena didn't flinch. She reached into her bag with slow, deliberate movements, and when her hand came back up, it wasn't empty. A thick folder worn at the edges, stuffed with papers and photographs, rested in her grip. Her voice rang out firm, unshaken. You wanted proof, Bradley. Here it is. She flipped the folder open. Photographs fluttered in the air. Mugshots of young black teenagers, arrest records, stamped with dates, police reports, with one name signed again and again. Officer Bradley Cole. The crowd surged forward. People craned their necks, desperate to see. And then a man's voice split the silence like a blade. That's my nephew's name, he shouted, his face twisted in rage. You ruined his life. He was just a kid. Gasps shot through the street. One by one, others started recognizing names, faces, stories that matched their own families. The murmur turned into a roar. Bradley's hands twitched. His eyes darted wildly as he grabbed for his radio, pressing it hard to his mouth. Unit 4, I need immediate backup now. But all that came back was static. His voice cracked louder, panicked. This is Officer Cole. Do you copy? Respond. Damn it, the line was dead. The officers who once stood behind him had quietly stepped back, blending into the sea of civilians. No one wanted to be dragged down with him. The sight of Bradley standing alone, gripping that useless radio like a lifeline, was almost pitiful. Almost. Malik's voice trembled as he looked at his mother. You knew all of this. Elena turned to him, her eyes soft but blazing with quiet fire. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder. I knew the truth, Malik, and I knew one day it would break through. Justice always finds its way. Her words cut deeper than any shout. Malik's chest heaved, his tears now mixed with something new, pride. The crowd boiled over. How many? Cole, someone roared. How many lives did you destroy? Another screamed. You framed kids and walked free. Bradley staggered back, his composure unraveling. His badge gleamed under the streetlight, but instead of commanding respect, it looked like a mark of shame. She's lying, he barked, voice breaking. She's twisting it all. Elena raised the folder, higher pages rustling in the wind. These aren't my words, Bradley. They're yours, your signatures, your reports, your crimes. The crowd erupted their anger now, a living, breathing force. Phones shut up a recording everything. The world beyond that street would see this. Bradley Cole stripped bare. His knees bent slightly like the weight of the evidence was dragging him down. He shook his head, sweat-dripping words tumbling out without order. No, no, you don't understand. This isn't how it looks, but it was. Everyone knew it. Beside Malik, Marcus's young face shifted. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a pale, horrified expression. He whispered, almost inaudible, "They were innocent. All of them." That whisper, fragile as it was, seemed to echo. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice above the storm. She just held the folder steady, her eyes locked on Bradley. And in that stillness, she had already won. The crowd pressed closer, shouts rising. "Arrest him! He's the criminal here! How many more families?" Cole Bradley's chest heaved, his shoulders hunched. He looked not like a cop anymore, but like a man cornered by his own sins, drowning in a sea of witnesses. And then the breaking point. His radio slipped from his trembling hand, clattering on the asphalt. The sound was sharp, final, like the gavel of a judge bringing down a verdict. Elena didn't move. She didn't need to. The truth had already shattered his armor. Bradley Cole stood there, stripped of authority, stripped of allies, just a man exposed in the raw light of justice. And for the first time that night, he looked afraid. The street had fallen into a strange, heavy silence. Papers fluttered across the asphalt, the faint sound of a siren fading somewhere far away. Everyone's eyes were locked on Bradley, his face drained of color, his grip on authority slipping with every passing second. And then from the middle of that charged silence came a voice. It was soft at first, almost trembling, but steady enough to pierce through the crowd. "I'm not your victim." Every head turned. It was Malik. His shoulders were still shaking from all he had endured, but his chin was lifted now, his eyes meeting Bradley's without flinching. His voice, though young and unrefined, carried something the officer's threats never could: truth. The crowd froze as if no one dared to breathe. Even Bradley staggered a half step back, his lips parting with the disbelief. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't because of a badge or a title. It was because a boy who had been pushed to the ground had chosen to rise. Bradley's voice cracked, defensive, desperate. "Sit down, boy. You don't know what you're saying." But Malik didn't move. He took another breath, stronger this time. "I've lived my whole life being told to stay down, to be quiet, to take it. Not anymore, not today." The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling like waves through the air. Some people nodded, their eyes shining. Others whispered, "That boy's brave," as if they too felt a spark rekindling inside themselves. From the edge of the crowd, Marcus suddenly broke forward. His legs wobbled, fear still clawing at him, but his steps carried him to Malik's side. Without a word, he reached out and clasped Malik's hand, squeezing hard. "You're not alone," Marcus said, his voice breaking. The sight of the two boys, one bruised, one trembling, standing together in defiance was enough to make the air electric. The whispers grew louder. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were feeling it. They were part of it. Bradley's face twisted in panic. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You think this changes anything?" His words were sharp, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Malik held his gaze. His voice no longer shook. It already has. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in a surge of support. Clapping shouts of agreement, voices crying out, "That's right, and we hear you," filled the air. It was as though every silent frustration, every buried story of injustice found its release in that single moment. And there, just behind them, Elena stood motionless. Her hand covered her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears she could no longer hold back. She had fought for years, sacrificed so much, carried secrets that weighed heavier than any badge. But nothing had ever moved her like this. Her son wasn't just surviving. He was standing. He was leading. Bradley staggered again, looking around wildly for backup, for authority, for anything to shield him. But there was nothing left. His radio was silent. His colleagues had stepped back. And now even the people he once thought beneath him were rising above him. Malik turned slightly toward the crowd, his voice carrying over the noise. "They told us we had no power. They told us we had no choice. But look around you. Look at what happens when we don't stay silent." The cheer that followed shook the block. Strangers embraced, fists rose in the air, and for the first time that day, hope felt louder than fear. Elena stepped forward, then her voice thick with pride. Malik. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. He wasn't just her son. He was proof that the next generation would not bow. And in that moment, everyone knew the story had shifted. The boy who had been cuffed, humiliated, and silenced had become something greater. He had become the voice they all needed. They moved in on Bradley at last. The same steel cuffs he had once snapped around Malik's small wrists now closed over his own. The sound of metal locking was sharp, almost cruel, and for the first time that day, Bradley had nothing left to say. His shoulders sagged, his smirk was gone. He looked smaller, diminished, as though justice itself had stripped him bare. Behind me, someone whispered, "Poetic justice." But no one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of victory. Mrs. Turner, who had stood on the sidelines through the whole ordeal, finally spoke. Her voice cracked almost like a confession she had been holding back for years. "I should have said something," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the ground. It was barely louder than Ozzy, but the weight of those words pressed on everyone's chest. Because we all knew she wasn't just talking about today. She was speaking for every moment silence had been chosen over truth. That right there was the heaviest verdict of all. Elena placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. No grand gestures, no speeches, just a quiet signal of strength, of release. They turned and began walking away, mother and son, side by side. The crowd parted for them, not with shouts of triumph, but with a silence so heavy it almost roared. People weren't celebrating. They were thinking, reflecting. Some hung their heads, others held their phones tighter, already knowing this moment wasn't going to stay here. It was going to travel. Malik's steps were different now, steadier. He wasn't shrinking into himself anymore. At the edge of the crowd, a phone camera caught him full in the face. This time he didn't look away. He lifted his chin and eyes straight into the lens. The boy who had once been cuffed, humiliated, treated as less than human, was now staring back at the world unflinching. And in that silence, that single look said more than words ever could. The street, the courthouse steps, the restless crowd, they all seemed to freeze for that heartbeat. Because everyone there understood this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. And I swear, standing there, I felt it ripple out like a wave, Malik's courage, Elena's unyielding resolve, the community's reckoning. Justice wasn't complete, not yet, but it had begun to move. And once it starts, it's hard to stop. That night, people would replay the footage. They'd share Malik's steady gaze across screens, across cities, across hearts. And they'd remember justice isn't born in courtrooms or written in statutes alone. It's born in the voices that refuse to stay silent, in the people who decide enough is enough. Elena and Malik disappeared down the street without fanfare, swallowed by the quiet. But the silence they left behind, it was the kind that lingers, the kind that changes you. Because from that day forward, nobody could say they hadn't seen. Nobody could say they didn't know. Justice had spoken, and it was still echoing. And that's the echo this story leaves us with, reminding us that justice doesn't just happen in courtrooms. It begins when ordinary people find the courage to stand up to speak and to refuse silence in the face of wrong. Malik's steady gaze wasn't just for that courtroom, it was for all of us. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories. Every click, every share, every subscription gives our team the strength and motivation to keep bringing you stories that matter, stories that stir the heart and speak to justice, dignity, and hope. Here at Mr. Max Stories, we believe in more than just storytelling. We believe in carrying the voices that too often go unheard. Your support helps us keep that promise alive. So let this be our symbol, our reminder. Whenever you see the name Mr. Max Stories, think of courage, truth, and the power of standing tall. Because together we're not just listening to stories, we're keeping them alive.